used them, my dad used them, and he would have said, "Send your smart people down here before I give you any advice." But it was awesome to have him alive. And Mother, of course, was around too. And she had
Mr. Bush, when are you going to apologize for the million Iraqis that are dead because you lied? You lied about weapons of mass destruction. You lied about connections to 9/11. You lied about Iraq being a threat. You sent me to Iraq. You sent me to Iraq in 2003. My friends are dead. Joshua Castile. You killed people. You lied. You lied about WMD. A million Iraqis are dead because you lied. My friends are dead because you lied. You need to apologize. Apologize. Apologize.
Are you with this gentleman? No. No.
You know, one of the things
Is she with this gentleman? Did she come in with him, or is she with
So, without further ado, Mike Preisner. Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, I guess, I don't know, my first question, like just before we get to what happened is, I don't know, I didn't serve in the military, so much props to you. But for me, I've been kind of disgusted with like the media's extreme makeover of George W. Bush. So I wanted to ask you, as somebody who served and has been so negatively affected, as well as the people you served with, what's it been like over the last 5 or 6 years where President Bush has basically been framed as like waxing poetic for the days of George W. Bush?
Yeah. You know, it's funny, like Bush used to be kind of too toxic to touch. I mean, if you remember back at the 2008 Republican National Convention, Bush was not there and had no speaking role. So even among his own party, he was too controversial, or was kind of too well known for his, massive, I guess you could call them failures, even though they kind of got the intended outcome of destroying an independent country and invading others. And so, yeah, I mean, really the first thing where Bush started to kind of step back into public life that was the most painful was when he started, of course, doing his paintings, but his first book of paintings was of soldiers who died in Iraq. And I honestly couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that that was a real thing that was happening. It just was so obscene. It had to be parody, but it's real. It's true. And then you're right, Jordan. It wasn't until really Trump that he had this opening to have a revival in his career. Now, ex-presidents all have very lucrative careers. Even, like if you're Bill Clinton, if you're Barack Obama, you get paid like $700,000 per speaking event. And that becomes like your main source of income after leaving office. Bush is kind of like a D-list ex-president. He gets between $100,000 and $175,000 for speaking events. But he's done over 200 speaking events since he left office in 2008, which means he's made about $35 million in speaking fees since he has left office. And to my knowledge, none of them have been disrupted. So to kind of know that his career is not only kind of bounced back in some way as a public figure, but related to the Iraq War. I mean, the paintings talking about his legacy as a president in like this positive, unchallenged way, like at the event I was at. So yeah, it's difficult. And I do want to say that for me, it was kind of like two worlds in which I really was exposed to and experienced the misery that the Iraq War brought. I mean, of course, first there's my own experiences, people that I cared about and being very close to them and all of the years since we went to Iraq and kind of seeing how it affected them. You know, my own experiences, although, of course, I was very lucky on my deployment and things got very, very bad the year after I left. But then there was the after I came home and joined the anti-war struggle and was organizing among military families whose loved ones in the military had died by suicide or who were killed in combat or who were severely disabled, and the families trying to pick up the pieces of a son or a husband coming home completely different, organizing among active duty and other Iraq veterans, getting to know them very closely and personally and seeing their lives kind of ripped apart and destroyed. And so there's, of course, my own experiences, but then there's the experience in the anti-war struggle. And, when I mentioned, like, my friends are dead because you lied, these are all people who died after they came home and who I met in the struggle and organized with. People like Thomas Young, a paralyzed veteran who then died of his wounds. Many people who died of suicide. A friend of mine, Zach Patterson, just died by suicide, about 6 months ago, and he was in the invasion of Iraq like me, and over 15 years ago. It just kind of shows you the kind of lasting impact that this has on people. And for soldiers who went for like 1 year, and imagine being an Iraqi, having that be literally the last 20 years, and of course, an ongoing nightmare in Iraq. And so, yeah, it's thinking about all of those people. And I think it really hit me because, like, preparing for this, it's a lot to think about. If you have a chance to say one thing to George W. Bush, what is it? And it took a lot of, reflection and thought. And so my idea was I wanted to read the names of people who died at Bush's hand, both Iraqis and Americans who I knew or had some connection to through organizing, and friends of mine who lost friends there who asked me to put their names on the list. And even just creating that list was like, which I did for the entire day leading up to the event, was a great reminder of the real toll that war took on those people. Because anyone who's lost a close family member, a spouse, or anything, that's something you never really recover from, especially when it should not have happened. It's one thing to lose a family member from an illness or a disease or something, but when you lose someone from a lie, a crime, that's when you have this yearning for justice. And thinking about all those people going into that event that I had spent the day collecting from various massacres in Iraq and so forth, and then hitting up families that I knew who lost people and things like that, it was a great reminder as to why Bush deserves this everywhere he goes.
There was a video, because you've been in the anti-war movement for a long time. And so I found a video in preparation for Monday's show that was you in 2012 talking about what you learned, like what you thought was happening, and kind of your intentions in trying to do something good when you were deployed to Iraq, and then what you discovered, the humanity that you uncovered, including with a little 8-year-old girl who very much reminded you of your sister. Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, sure. And this is, something I testified about at the Winter Soldier hearings in 2008, where myself and hundreds of other Iraq war vets and active duty service members spoke about their experiences. But yeah, I mean, I think for some important context, I joined the Army like 1 month before the 9/11 attacks in 2001. So the Army I had joined was just like a different world, and everyone going into the military, like everyone in my basic training, no one ever thought they were going to deploy anywhere, because the idea of large scale wars, just seemed like a thing of the past and not a thing of modern warfare. Like the only war in recent memory was the Gulf War, where, yeah, a lot of soldiers went, none of them were in combat. All the U.S. soldiers who died were pretty much killed by friendly fire, their U.S. bombing that screwed up and killed a bunch of Americans. So there really wasn't a consciousness that if you joined the military, it meant you were going to war. And so my entire basic training was all people who were like, yeah, I was living in my car, and then this recruiter knocked on the window and is like, hey, do you want to live in the barracks? Stories like that. I mean, it was like 99. I mean, it's actually funny because when, the drill sergeants would ask you, why did you join the Army? I was the only one who said to serve my country. And it was like a joke. And they would like laugh at you because everyone else would say healthcare, college money, job training. Those were the reasons people were joining at that time. Of course, there was like a shift after 9/11 where you had a lot of people joining for revenge, for retribution, or to knowing the country was going to go to war and wanting to participate and all of that stuff. So the consciousness changed a little. But yeah, for someone like me who joined, kind of with this real, like we're so heavily indoctrinated in the U.S. about what the military is as this force for good in the world. I joined the Army when I was 17. I actually turned 18 in basic training. And so teenagers who are so heavily indoctrinated with this like American exceptionalism and the military is the most glorious thing you can be a part of, there's a real consciousness that you are this force for good in the world. And, there really, for most people, really wasn't anything in recent memory to disprove that, because there was like no big, Vietnam was so far in the past and all of that stuff. And so, so it was a big wake up call for a lot of us to kind of have this belief that in Iraq in particular, it was called Operation Iraqi Freedom. The whole point was Iraq was under a dictatorship and that we are going to go and bring democracy to Iraq and a better life for the people of Iraq. Very quickly, because I was a part of the invasion, you realize that Iraqis had a pretty good life before the U.S. invasion. Of course, their political system was dictatorial and there was severe political repression. And so in the sphere of politics, it was, of course, backward and bad. But in public life, healthcare, education, housing, Iraq was a very nice place. Very nice place to live. Families from all over the Middle East would, it was a great honor to send your children to Baghdad to go to university. And so people from all over the Middle East would aspire to go to school in Iraq. And so there is, and despite, the effects of the sanctions, which of course were very difficult, but to this idea of bringing a better life to a people that had a better life than the people I met in basic training, who had to join the military because they couldn't get access to healthcare or they couldn't go to college. Yet those were the people that were going to deliver this better life to people who had college. And I remember Iraqis being like, "You guys have to work to go to school. What the hell is wrong with your country?" So of course there is that disconnect between this caricature that we had in our minds of what Iraqi life and society was like. But then, of course, the occupation began. And as the occupation dragged on, you cease to be liberators and you become an occupying force. And so my experience as just an occupying soldier, going on convoys, being at checkpoints, working out in the town in an Iraqi government building and kind of seeing the way the occupation was managed by the Coalition Provisional Authority, which was basically U.S. dictatorship, replaced Iraqi dictatorship. And so, of course, there were many moments that were real turning points for me that made me really disgusted with what I was being part of. And one of those, as you mentioned, Jen, was, coming face to face with a young girl who, 8 years old, my sister was 8 years old at the time, who looked very much like my sister, and her older siblings spoke perfect English and were pleading with us to get out of their house. And, their family, all the men in their family were being arrested. It was just a horrific thing to witness, young children, just in complete terror at the fact that they were watching their fathers and uncles be taken away in the back of a truck, not knowing if they're ever going to see them again. And I think for a lot of people who went through the same transformation of me as I did, is that the Iraq War was so much based on racism, on anti-Muslim bigotry, on anti-Arab bigotry. Racial slurs were used, and this kind of, any American war has to dehumanize the people that you're fight, so you see commonality with them. And that was one of those moments that, made me think, what would I think of me if this was my sister, and about the people that were in the American uniforms? And I knew what I would think. I would want to fight those people.